Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. I noticed I just made a mistake. I didn't go live. I did the whole introduction, and it wasn't live on the air. So it may be painful, but I have to go through that again. So, folks, we're doing the case of Ana Walshe, who we believe, and many believe, was murdered by her husband, Brian. And in this case, there is so much critical evidence, yet it's the kind of case that defense attorneys love and prosecutors do not love. But this woman who you see up on the screen, Ana Walshe, the wife of Brian Walshe here that you see inside court, went missing on January 1st, 2023. This case gripped the nation for its tragedy and the fact that there was 3 young boys left behind and who are now in the custody of the state. But the meticulous police work and complex evidence at its core, with the trial set for October 20th, 25, let's break down how investigators built their case, the forensic hurdles, and what this means for law enforcement everywhere. So this case, when Ana Walshe went missing on January 1st, 2023, right away there was some fugaziness relative to her husband, who you see here up on the screen. Ana was reported missing from a home in Cohasset, Massachusetts, and from the very beginning, officers noticed inconsistencies in Brian Walsh's account. He claimed Ana left for a sudden work trip to D.C., but there was no flight, no rideshare, and no communication from Ana. This immediately triggered a deeper investigation, including a house search and a timeline reconstruction. And there was forensic evidence involved very early on. There was the backbone, actually, of this case is the forensic evidence. Blood pooled in the basement. A damaged, blood-stained knife was recovered. A hacksaw. Blood-soaked rugs were recovered. And the other part of this that is quite damaging, of course, is the digital trail. Google searches from a family device. How long before a body starts to smell? How do you dispose of a 115-pound woman's body? Can you be charged with murder without a body? Surveillance footage showed Brian buying $450, which I put up on the screen, $450 worth of cleaning materials, mops, tarps, and buckets, just hours before Ana disappeared. A judge recently ruled this digital evidence is admissible, and which strengthens the prosecution's case. And it's an example of why digital forensics are now a standard part of every major investigation. So, folks, that is what we're going to be looking in tonight. That is what we're going to be covering. So hold on to your hats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your cup of coffee, hold on to your service dog. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
Joining me tonight, I'm really happy to have these two fellas. It's always good to have the camaraderie of fellow NYPD sergeants, detectives, and members of the service. That's how we used to call each other, members of the service, right? Because that was the code word we used. You would say to someone, are you an MOS? And if they were, they would know what you were talking about. If they weren't, they were a fraud. So that was the lingo we used. Anyway, the first guest I'm going to invite or just introduce is retired NYPD Sergeant, Professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Welcome, Mike.
Bill, good to see you. Thank you for having me on tonight.
Well, it's great. I'm also glad, every once in a while he reaches out to me between cannolis. Retired NYPD detective straight out of Brooklyn. Welcome to the show, Detective Phil Grimaldi. Welcome, Phil.
What a great introduction, Billy. Thank you for having me.
Well, I think people, they like the joviality of and the interaction that we do. And I think the camaraderie really shows when we talk to each other. Mike, I want to address you first. How many cases do we cover in the true crime genre where we try to convince our audience how powerful circumstantial evidence is? And as much as we do it, they still don't believe us, And this here is a circumstantial case.
Bill, most all of the cases, people say if it's circumstantial evidence, it's not nearly as powerful as direct evidence. But it is absolutely as powerful because people don't realize in almost all cases, all murder cases, we'll just talk about murder cases, there is mostly circumstantial evidence. And circumstantial evidence is most of the evidence that the police gather and it's presented at trial, and very, very little direct evidence. But people want the big, the video. They want the detective. I'm sorry, the detective to get from the defendant, statements that incriminate themselves. And all the little things, they're really important. But people like, that's circumstantial. But no, most all cases are built on circumstantial evidence, and that is the most important kind of evidence because it's the most plentiful.
100%, Mike. And, it's that the evidence they have in this case. I mean, it's also, recovering a knife with blood on it, a hacksaw, a bloody rugs, and other. That's direct evidence, isn't it?
Well, it would be considered circumstantial, depending on how you define circumstantial or direct. People sometimes say direct evidence is incriminating statements made by the defendant, video of the crime being occurring, or an eyewitness. Or some people consider DNA also direct evidence. Some prosecutors see direct evidence, circumstantial evidence as everything but those three other things, even DNA, fingerprints, ballistics. They think that is all DNA evidence. In this case, if that's her blood pooled on the floor, if that's her blood on the knife, if there's any sort of human tissue on that hacksaw, then to me, and some other people might disagree, but to me, that's circumstantial because it leads the jury to have to make the inference, the logical inference. If there's no body and you just have the blood, does that blood indicate to you, beyond reasonable doubt, that Anna was killed? But all that blood indicates that she was murdered. So depending on exactly how you look at it, but I would consider the bloody tools and the blanket to be circumstantial.
I want to direct this next question to Phil. Anna's body has never been recovered, which means prosecutors must prove murder without a body, which is tough. Plus, the lead investigator, Trooper Michael Proctor, was fired in 2024 for unrelated misconduct. He's, of course, the lead investigator on the Karen Reed case. The DA has decided not to call him as a witness, but the judge found enough probable cause to send the case to trial anyway. What I want to know, Phil, is how challenging is it for a prosecutor as well as investigators to present a murder case without the recovery of the body?
Bill, it's very challenging, obviously, when you don't have a person's body found. There's no definitive way to say 100% that person is the victim of a homicide. However, with all the case evidence that we see presented in this case, we have blood, we have bone fragment on a hacksaw. There's so many things indicating that a crime took place, and as well as the fact that there was no trace of Ana Walshe. The story that Brian Walsh gave initially was that she had gone on some type of a business trip. However, they found that there was no transportation to the airport. There was no flight. Her name was never on a manifest, and she hasn't been seen or heard from in quite some time. So I believe some of the challenges are there. Sometimes the family members will have her declared dead. That would be helpful in the case. Now we know that she's been declared dead. And when we have all this other circumstantial evidence that Mike talked about, I mean, we have motive here. We have a lot of different things. We have the perpetrator in this case, Brian, being diagnosed with an antisocial behavioral diagnosis. I believe it was a sociopath by the Austin Riggs Psych Center in Massachusetts. That was before any of this stuff happened. So we also know that he was under indictment for selling fraudulent art equipment. So those are the things, the insurance policy on Ana, those are the things that we believe will contribute to the motive. We have a ton of circumstantial evidence. I mean, his behavioral pattern changed where he goes out on New Year's Day and purchases the cleaning equipment, the hacksaw, things of that nature. So when you put all of these pieces together, and Bill, you've said it 100 times, circumstantial evidence, when it's piled up and it makes a big, large pile, it's very, very powerful. And again, difficult to prove a murder case without a bottle, without a victim's body. However, not impossible. It's been done many times in the past.
Absolutely. Latisse, thank you so much for the $9.99 super sticker. Very much appreciated. I think a lot of people, this is a case, and we spoke about this before we went on the air, the Doulos case, also out of Massachusetts. It was Connecticut, the Doulos case.
Mm-hmm.
But
yes, Connecticut.
An affluent couple where the husband, Fotis Doulos, murders his wife. Again, never recovered the body, but Fotis Doulos' girlfriend is now doing like 30 years in prison for her part in that murder. And Fotis Doulos committed suicide. So these are ugly, ugly cases. And in the case of Fotis Doulos and Jennifer Doulos, they had 5 kids. In this case, they have 3 kids. And I was like a little bit, I can't say upset, but a little perturbed to hear that in the case of the Walshes, Ana Walshe and her and the husband, right? Brian Walsh, they have 3 kids that are in custody of the state right now. You would have to be a lunatic to do what he did and to do what he did to his kids. Even if he hated his wife, look what he did to his 3 young sons, Mike.
Yeah, Bill, it's awful. Here he is. He's got this amazingly successful and beautiful wife making with a great living. All indications are that she's a terrific mom to her kids. And he's looking at like 3 years in prison. He's waiting to be sent to a federal camp, federal prison. And maybe he was looking, remember, for him, it's narcissistic. It's all about what's good for him. He's maybe thinking, she's going to leave me. I'm not going to see the kids. But it's possible he was thinking, well, if she disappears, they won't send the father of the 3 children to prison. Maybe I'll get off, somehow, or there's that life insurance. But, it's a terrible, horrific, cold-blooded calculation that he feels that his life would be better and the lives of his children, which maybe he didn't even consider their lives. Maybe they just represent a way to stay out of prison. And if she's gone, there's nobody else to take care of the kids. Really cold-blooded, calculating, it's a terrible thing. And the family, Anna's family comes from, I think, Serbia, Eastern Europe. And so it appears that they don't have anything to do with the children right now. The children are the wards of the state. Yeah, up to this day.
Yeah, which is so horrible. Just to recap now, some of the evidence they have against Brian Walsh is blood pooled in the basement, a damaged blood-stained knife, a hacksaw, and blood-soaked rugs and other items. And, of course, the digital evidence of him going to a store and buying $450 worth of cleaning fluid. Now, look, again, Mike, we spoke circumstantial, yes, but with all of the other circumstances, all of the other evidence, she disappeared.
Mhm.
He had motive. The motive was she had a $2.7 million life insurance policy, right?
Mhm.
He was also slated to go to prison for artwork fraud. He sold 3 Andy Warhol paintings. I don't know exactly, but he had a fine or restitution of
Right.
$475,000. So he was looking to get out of that as well as get the money. So they have the motive. What do they call it? Motive, opportunity,
Opportunity.
desire. He
Mhm.
had all three, and he put that together. And it's really sad. But again, this is a circumstantial case. Yet, what also strengthens it more is the digital evidence. We haven't even gotten into his phone evidence, the searches on Google. That's very powerful, Phil, isn't it?
Absolutely, Billy. I mean, some of the searches, hair on a dead body, baking soda mask, smell of dead body. How do you mask the smell of a dead body with baking soda? How long before a body begins to smell? Can you throw away body parts? All these different things. 10 ways to dispose of a body. Best hacksaw to dismember a body, and then he purchased a hacksaw subsequent to that search. Can you ID a body with broken teeth? Can you be charged with murder with no body? These are just some of the searches that they found, I believe, on his son's iPad. And just going back quickly to what Mike was saying about the fact that he left his children now, and Bill, you brought it up, his children now in the wards of the state. When he was diagnosed as a sociopath, that is a person with a personality disorder manifesting itself into extreme antisocial attitudes and behavior. And then in parentheses, a lack of conscience. So there you have it. He was diagnosed as a sociopath. He doesn't have a conscience, even about his own children. I think that some of the stuff you just laid out, Billy, he was going to go to jail. He has this huge fine against him. He's going to go to jail, and he saw his life fleeting away. Maybe he felt that his wife was having an affair. We know that the mother hired a private investigator. So now he's going to be out of the picture in jail for a few years. And what's going to happen with his wife and his family? So this, I believe, generated him to act in the way he acted and killed his wife and tried to pull off this murder without being caught. And he took some extreme steps and purchased the cleaning equipment, as we know, and the other items. So I don't think that, even though we know that from the Karen Reed case that investigator was on both of those cases and has been since dismissed from the state police, I think that even with those factors that remain, I think we're still going to wind up with a conviction here. The judge just ruled against having the case dismissed. So I think that it's going to be a little bit of a hill to climb, but we'll get there. I really feel strongly about that.
Eileen from the chat, she was leaving him. Yeah,
Yes.
apparently. And that's, they always say, and that's like a little rule of thumb, that in the world of domestic violence, the most dangerous part of that is when
Leaving.
a woman chooses to leave.
Mhm.
And sure enough, I don't know if she told him that, but surely enough, she's murdered. She was unalived. We don't know where her body is. So all of those things. From the chat, use Trooper Proctor involved. This could go sideways. What a shame. Yeah, it is a shame because this is a very, very strong case. And it's a shame that, if there is this investigator Proctor who showed some corrupt activities on the Karen Reed case, that he's the lead investigator on this. They can't even use him to testify, nor does the prosecution intend to. But very, 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 very disgusting that he is on this case also,
Billy, what role did he play? Was he recovering evidence? Because if you have all this evidence and he had his hand in recovering it, then I guess some of it could be tainted. But I don't know what his exact role in the case was. I think that needs to be determined. And sometimes juries, believe it or not, will understand that there was something that went wrong during the investigation with this Proctor, this investigator Proctor. But when you have a mountain of circumstantial evidence, and I really do believe there's a lot more evidence in this case than there was in that Karen Reed case. And, with all the blowback against police in that case, which we know took place. I don't think we're going to see that here because this is a two civilians. Civilian was killed by the husband, we believe, and he's being prosecuted, and he has a lot more dirt in his closet, so to speak, than there was in the other case.
Except, Phil and Mike, you might agree with this, is that when juries see police corruption, they tend to throw everything out. They tend to find nothing credible because it's like the fruits of the poisonous tree, that you ate a piece of fruit from the poisonous tree, but it's poison. So we're throwing everything out. So we're not going to believe anyone because this guy Proctor is a dirty guy. Latisse from the chat, the defense was trying to get the cell phone and iPad data thrown out because it was illegally obtained. Latisse, yes, I was just going to address that with the motion to dismiss was denied by the judge on August 19th, 2025. I have the document. I'm going to put it up on the screen. And Mike, I want you to comment upon this because this is pretty damn important. Here it is. It's up on the screen now. On March 30th, 2023, a Norfolk County grand jury indicted the defendant, Brian Walshe, on charges of murder, misleading a police officer, and unlawful conveyance of a human body. The grand jury heard 12 days of testimony from 23 witnesses and received over 200 exhibits. The Commonwealth's theory is that the defendant killed his wife, Ana Walshe, in their home during the early morning hours of January 1st, 2023, and subsequently covered up his crime by dismembering and disposing of the body and misleading police investigation. The defendant now moves to dismiss indictment 001, charging murder in the first degree on the ground that the grand jury heard insufficient evidence to sustain the indictment. The court conducted a non-evidentiary hearing on the motion on July 24th, 2025. After careful consideration, the court concludes that the evidence presented to the grand jury sufficed to establish probable cause to warrant issuance of the indictment. The defendant's motion to dismiss is therefore denied. Mike.
Yeah, people don't realize that in a when you have a homicide case or any serious felony case, it's going to be gone before you go to trial. The defendant will be facing an indictment, which is a grand jury proceeding. If the grand jury believes that there is probable cause to believe that the crime that charged was actually the crime committed, they will issue what they call a true bill. A true bill means they believe that there's probable cause, the crime is correct, and therefore they will issue an indictment on that crime. It's not a very high standard. There's no defense work going on. It's the prosecutor presenting their best witnesses to give a very brief synopsis of the evidence to show that the trial has merit, and therefore the case should go forward to trial. Look, every single defense attorney wants to say these sorts of things, that there was insufficient evidence in the grand jury proceedings, because they keep trying to conflate the requirement. The requirement isn't that the grand jury finds guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. No, they're not determining guilt. They're just determining whether or not there is probable cause to believe that the charge, that the crime occurred, this person's guilty, this person committed it, and that the charge is the correct one: murder first degree, murder third degree, whatever it happens to be. So these happen very quickly. Sometimes it's 2 days, sometimes it's 45 minutes. We've all testified at these cases, and they usually proceed rather rapidly. But since the standard for the jury to issue the indictment is very low, it's probable cause, these things are very easily defended by prosecutors to say, look, it is the absolute right of that grand jury, to hear whatever evidence we presented to them, preliminary evidence, and based on that and that alone suffices to find that the charge is correct. This is, the idea that he could get the indictment thrown out. You try your best, like Ann Taylor in the Koberger case. You try your best. You throw everything at the prosecution to try to derail their case. You make every motion you can to the judge, but in the end, you know it's really not going to probably go your way, and the evidence is going to come in like it's going to come in this case.
Absolutely. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. We have a new sponsor. FanDuel is a sponsor of the Police Off the Cuff podcast on the Believe Network. And you can go online with FanDuel and you can place a bet, either any sport, NFL, Major League Baseball, National Basketball League. And you can go online at FanDuel. And believe it or not, all of us who have been going through football withdrawal, the first opening night of the NFL season is Thursday night when the Philadelphia Eagles will host the Dallas Cowboys. So you can get on FanDuel, which is sponsoring the Police Off the Cuff podcast, and support our channel by placing a bet with FanDuel. And if you're not into sports betting, that's fine. But FanDuel is the sponsor of Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. Also, folks, if you want to subscribe to Police Off the Cuff, just hit the subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, hit the like button, share us with your friends and your family, and make comments. We love that. The other thing is we have a Patreon with 4 different levels, and a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels, and you can support this channel through supporting either our Patreon or our YouTube channel. So this case now, again, it keeps getting back to the fact that there is no body. But we know on a national level, different states, I know in New York, there's been homicide convictions without a body being found. In fact, we had a great Manhattan DA on a couple of years ago named Dan Bibb, who had a very complicated homicide case of a physician that killed his wife, put her in his private plane, flew her over the Atlantic Ocean, and dumped the body out of the plane. They never, ever found her body. But guess what? The doctor got convicted on Manhattan Assistant District Attorney Dan Bibb's spectacular presentation of that case. So when people think that no body, no conviction, that is not true, Mike.
Yeah, it makes it harder for the prosecution to prove that a death occurred, as Phil talked about early on. But we see it happening like the Lacey Peterson case, the Dulos case. And if you just look at this case, it's not just like there's one drop of blood of poor Anna down the basement. There was a pool of blood. In the hacksaw, there was some tissue or bone fragments. Okay, so you don't see her arm anywhere, but you do see microscopic pieces of bone or flesh. All it takes, circumstantial evidence, only asks that the prosecution ask the jury to make a logical conclusion. What does that mean? What does that big pool of blood mean? What does that bloody blanket mean? What's the meaning of that hacksaw? Also, she's a mom of 3 kids. If she's still alive, where is she? She hasn't used her credit card in 3 years. She hasn't used an ATM card. She hasn't made a phone call. She hasn't contacted her children. She hasn't sent an email. Where could she possibly be? You have to show that, she circumstantially that she's passed away, that she's the victim of a homicide. It can be done, but it makes it harder. But it's not impossible whatsoever. It's very possible to prosecute this case.
Absolutely. I want to play this from Court TV.
Young boys. In 2022, Ana obtained a position with a real estate company which forced her to split time between her home with her family in Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. This move, along with Brian's federal indictment related to an art scam, put a lot of strain on their relationship. Then, after spending New Year's having dinner with friends, Ana seemingly vanished. She was reported missing by her employer in D.C. and by Brian on January 4th. Investigators suspected Brian and ended up executing a search warrant which uncovered evidence they believe proves Brian murdered and dismembered Ana, despite the fact that her remains have never been found. Brian has been charged with Ana's murder and is locked up waiting for his trial.
Think about this story.
So all of that evidence, I mean, Phil, if you were sitting on a jury and you found a bloody knife, you found a hacksaw, you found bloody clothing, and you found other forensic evidence without even mentioning the digital evidence, what would a juror conclude? What possible other thing could you conclude other than Brian Walshe murdered his wife in his home, the basement of his home? And then to add even more evidence to that, here's a picture of him, the one to the left in this thumbnail in black and white, of buying $450 worth of cleaning equipment to clean up the crime scene, Phil.
Yeah, you could see right in that photo, Billy, there's a box of bags. You can see the actual hacksaw. When the standard in our country with the criminal justice system that we have, jurors have to take into consideration all the facts, all the evidence, and they have to come to a conclusion based beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think that that's what we get at looking at reasonable. Is this reasonable to believe that all of these things that took place before, during the searches that were subsequent to her being reported missing, all of these things are reasonable in my mind? We have, I'm sure the prosecution is going to put forth information that they firmly believe that she is no longer alive, based on some of the things that Mike just said. Hasn't had contact with her children in all this time, no credit card use. She didn't take any trains, buses, planes, anything of that nature. So we're going to make a basis. We're going to make a foundation that, yes, we believe she's no longer with us, that she's deceased. Now we're going to introduce all of these other facts and all these little bits of evidence. And I think that the jury instructed properly. Now, Bill, I got to push back a little bit on what you said earlier about the fruits of the poisonous tree. I know that the fruits of the poisonous tree, things of that nature with regard to evidence, those things get hashed out not in the presence of the jury. So the jury may never hear about that trooper that was fired from the Karen Reed case. If the defense calls him, then perhaps it could be introduced. But I don't think that any of the evidence that's going to be put forward in front of the jury is going to be stuff that was deemed fruits of the poisonous tree. Of course, the judge will make the decisions on that. There'll be the arguments that took place, and as we saw in that document you put up, that the call for dismissal of the charges was denied. It was denied. So the judge feels strongly there's enough relevant information to keep the case going, not to dismiss the charges. And then once the trial plays out, and juries, a lot of time juries aren't given credit for paying attention and for being, very, very intense on listening to the case. This is not a standard case. It's not a shoplifting case. This is a very, very intricate murder case. A lot of information is going to be put forward. And I've been in courtrooms when, information on murder cases is being given, a testimony. And I'll tell you, those jurors, for the most part, do pay attention. They do look into these things. And then when they go into deliberation, a lot of times they ask questions. And, if they have the right to get the answers, the judge always can make a ruling on that. And I think that they come to the right decision most of the time. Now, listen, it's not a perfect system. Nothing is. But I think that the system that we have in our country is probably the best throughout the world.
Absolutely. This also is from Law and Crime.
Children 2, 4, and 6.
But weeks after her disappearance, a shocking arrest made in the case.
At 4:55 a.m. on January 1st, he searched how long before a body starts to smell. At 4:58 a.m., how to stop a body from decomposing. At 5:20 a.m., he searched how to found a body. At 5:47 a.m., 10 ways to dispose of a dead body if you really need to. At 6:25 a.m. on the 1st, how long for someone to be missing to inherit. At 6:34 a.m. on the 1st, can you throw away body parts?
Ana Walshe's disappearance made headlines nationwide. On New Year's Eve in 2022, Ana and her husband Brian had dinner with a friend of Brian's. But by New Year's Day, it would be the last day she was seen alive. On January 4th of 2023, she was officially reported missing after she didn't show up to work. Brian also reported his wife missing and told authorities Ana left their home for a flight to D.C. Police confirmed Ana did book a flight for January 3rd. However, her debit and credit cards hadn't been used since January 1st. Her disappearance sparked an extensive search involving search and rescue teams as well as canine officers to scour wooded areas near her home. Then on January 7th of last year, investigators received a startling email. It said, "We had the so-called Ana Walshe with us. We had a deal worth $127,000. She messed up. We have her here with us. And if she doesn't pay the money, then she'll never be back. And we know that the police and the FBI are involved. Good luck finding us." According to authorities, the email was sent from the Gmail account of Richard Walker 9984. Authorities flagged the email as suspicious, but a day after the email was sent, the investigation took another turn. Investigators got a search warrant for the Walshes' Cohasset home and made a shocking discovery. Blood was found in the home as well as a bloody knife in the basement. Brian Walshe was arrested that same day and charged with misleading a police investigation. Then the following day, on January 9th, more than a week after Ana was seen alive, her husband was arraigned in court. According to the prosecution, investigators found no evidence of Ana taking a rideshare from their home to the airport on the 1st. The Commonwealth said Brian's statements to police were a clear attempt to mislead and delay investigators. By that time, Ana still hadn't been found, and prosecutors called Ana's disappearance suspicious. Then, more than a week after Brian Walshe initially appeared in a Massachusetts courtroom, he was officially charged with her murder, despite Ana's body still not being found. According to the prosecution, Brian murdered his wife, dismembered her body, and threw her remains in a dumpster. While appearing in court, the Commonwealth laid out a timeline of what they believed happened and claimed Brian made some shocking internet searches from his son's iPad.
What I'd like to do now is just describe his actions in the days from January 1st. The defendant indicated on January 1st at 3 p.m. he did some errands and went to his mother's house in Swampscott, but got lost because he didn't have his phone. He said he knew he was lost when he saw the pirate ship on Route 1. Defendant stayed 15 minutes, then went to Whole Foods and CVS. Surveillance was checked and he did not enter either of those stores. On January 1st, defendant Googled using his son's iPad. Some of his searches are as follows. Keep in mind that the defendant said he left at 6 a.m. At 4:55 a.m. on January 1st, he searched how long before a body starts to smell.
All right, she's sort of going over what we already heard before. You know, Mike, this is, first of all, this guy, Mr. Walshe here, Mr. Brian Walshe, he doesn't sound like he's all there. I mean, he kills his wife in his house and leaves all the evidence there. Like, what, you know, that wouldn't that show maybe a level of some mental illness here, that he's not really thinking too clearly?
Yeah, Bill, it shows probably tremendous stress on his part. Just think about it. You leave the tools of the homicide there. You also use your son's iPad, like thinking that, oh, the police aren't going to look there. If they might look at mine, but they're not going to look at my kids. You know, it shows a real lack of sophistication. And I'm glad in a way, because this makes it easier to prosecute. He's not a brilliant, criminal, but he's probably under a lot of stress. He doesn't know what to do. He didn't really think it out. He didn't think it out. We could take a look at, like, maybe talk about the Koberger case and how much he thought out and how much he missed. But in this case, other than the body being recovered, he made so many mistakes in this case. Thankfully, he made so many mistakes. But yeah, he probably didn't think this out really well at all. Maybe the alcohol was affecting him. Maybe they had another fight, after midnight, after that other couple left. And it all kind of spiraled out of control from what he was going to probably do. And it turned into a homicide right there. And he took her body down the basement and, did what he had to do to dismember her. But yeah, he didn't think this one out at all. Thank goodness.
One of the things I want to let some of the people in the chat are asking, right now he's being held. He actually was sentenced to do 3 years on the art fraud from California. So that's what he's being held on right now. Well, not being held, he's convicted. So they don't have to worry about, the speed, how go to trial right away, because he's not going anywhere. And he's being held in prison right now. But the trial is slated to go forward October 20th of this year, of this October. So this case is going to move forward. So those in the chat asking, yes, he's being held on that art fraud case in which he was ordered also to pay $475,000 restitution. So was he a bit of a flim-flam man, this guy? What was his whole act, Phil?
Well, it appears that he had a personality disorder, and he was dealing in fake art. So he was basically a con artist. When the house of cards started to fall in on him, that's when he decided to kill his wife and perhaps collect an insurance policy that would cover maybe legal expenses, cover the maybe pay people back for the fake art, maybe and get rid of that problem in his life. And again, not taking his children into consideration, not taking his family, not taking his poor wife Anna into consideration. Total narcissistic, psychopathic, and sociopathic behavior. We've seen it in other cases before. So I think that let's just keep our fingers crossed that we do get the conviction in this case. And just a quick comment about trying a case where nobody is found. We had cases in the past. A colleague of mine, Bill, you know him, Tommy Dates. He tried a case in federal court. He was able to make an arrest and get a conviction on a organized crime member that was killed, and the body was never recovered, the actual body. But there was enough information similar to this in a different way with informants and different things of that nature that they were able to put forward that he was missing. He had been killed. And then once there was enough information from informants, they were able to secure a conviction in federal court without ever recovering the body.
Mike, that is a challenge, of course, for a prosecutor when there's no body to prove a murder. But the evidence that they recovered in this, and again, we're calling it circumstantial evidence, the bloody knife, the hacksaw, the bloody blanket, blood pooling on the floor of the basement, the digital evidence, it's all really, really, really strong circumstantial evidence. And you wonder, well, obviously, I'm sure that Mr. Walshe, Brian Walshe, has some really good attorneys, some high-powered, expensive attorneys. So they're able to do what we know in this business is what gets guilty people off, to create doubt. Because the prosecution has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And the defense, their whole job is to create doubt. You want to speak upon that, Mike?
Yeah, Bill, that's what they're going to try to do. They're going to try to come up with some other narrative that they can create, which would show that the prosecution's theory of the case, as Phil and you just laid out, happened. No. It's going to be that some other reality happened. Something else happened. Give them a story. I actually think in this case that when it goes to trial, he's going to come up with not an affirmative defense, because we know he's not going to try an affirmative defense, but he might come up with a totally different scenario. Maybe a scenario involving finding his wife's body down the basement and not knowing what to do with it. Something totally, totally different from what you would expect. And see if you can get one of those jurors to go down that path with you, holding your hand as you go off into la la land. So it's possible. I think he just might come up with some sort of really unique, outrageous kind of thing that nobody would consider. And remember, all he does is have to convince one person and get a hung jury. And then if that happens, if that does happen, he may be in a good place to get a plea bargain. I think his life is over no matter what plea bargain you may even get with this guy. But I think he's such a narcissist, and Phil's pointed this out. It's all about him. It's not about family. It's not about anything else. It's about him. And I think he has this idea that in some way he could beat this case.
He had no qualms besides the fact that the most egregious thing he did was kill his wife. But the other outcome of that was that his 3 young boys were put as wards of the state. And anyone knows, if you've dealt with Bureau of Child Welfare, it's horrific. It's horrific how the state treats children. And I know I'm going to get some hate mail or some hate comments about this, but that's okay. I don't
Right
think
off
there's
the bat,
anyone.
Billy, they're separated. They're not going to be all five together. So right there, I mean,
No,
kids
well,
grow up
they, no,
together.
they have three boys.
Oh,
They have.
three kids. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so three kids will probably be separated. I mean, I guess they would try to keep them together, but kids growing up together now, mother's gone, father's gone, mother's killed, father's being charged with the murder. And they're not going to be in an environment that they were used to, so I guess, yeah, that's pretty, that alone is tragic. But
No, but Phil, it's the resources that are put into in our society protecting kids that have problem parents.
Yeah.
There's not, the resources are not put into it. So the kids are not treated in this instance probably the way they're used to being treated. And it's a horrible thing. And to think that this guy, obviously the most serious thing he did was kill his wife. But the second thing, which was the outcome to that, was that his three young boys were given to the state and being held by the state. It's horrible, horrible. Mike.
Yeah, but we've seen this before. We've all seen this when we were on patrol, and even maybe you guys saw it in detective squads. You get these pins warrants, and you take the kids out of the house, or the parents get arrested, and you've got to do something with the children. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. They're totally all those investigators, they try their hardest, but they're overwhelmed. There's not enough investigators. There's not enough support staff. There's not enough budget. There's not enough ways to deal with the kids. There's people on call lists, and God bless them. I know a few of them. They're terrific people, and they're ready 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If they get a call, they'll come pick up a kid. But that's only temporary because they need some sort of permanent, real feeling of a constant home. But, it's a toss-up as to whether or not it's a toss-up of a coin as to whether or not they're going to end up in a good place or a horrible place. And that's not the way any kid should grow up. But we've seen this time and time again. There's just not enough funds and options to give those kids some sort of real chance. Right now, they're suffering and they've got nothing but somebody who's paid to take care of them. That's not a good place to be.
No. Someone asked about family, and I believe Anna's family's from Serbia.
Right.
So they're not citizens of the U.S., so they're not going to hand the kids over to them. So that, and I don't know Anna's family, but usually in situations like this, extended family will happily take the children.
Right.
But in this instance, they're from another country. So our government's not going to hand the children over to them because of fears that they would flee the country with the children. Phil.
Yeah, Billy, you were in the squad. You were in the homicide squad. How many times did you come in? And there's just about every day when I was in the squad, runaways from group homes and foster homes, again, because they're not used to the scenery, or they're not used to being in that environment. They're used to what they grew up in. And now they get tossed into a group home in Coney Island where I worked, or a foster home. And, they may have to obey rules that they didn't obey when they were in their own home. So this is where I think the conflict comes in. And you're right, there just isn't enough effort maybe put into taking care of kids, because there are so many of them. So they force them into these group homes and these foster homes. But Mike, I got a quick question for you with regard to whatever defense they're going to put forward. Don't they have to present that to the judge before they go into the trial stage with the jury present? They have to put forward how they're going to defend the case, or what they believe happened in this case. So don't they have to do that, Mike?
Yeah.
We went through that just with the Koberger case when they tried to come up with another perpetrator.
Yeah, if there's an alibi, that sort of thing, or if there's like an affirmative defense, like self-defense, intoxication, duress or whatever, they have to give notice to the prosecution so the prosecution can be ready. So I think they've not done that. So since they've avoided that, I think he's going to have to get up and on the stand and try to spin some sort of alternate reality to show that maybe there's some sort of, this isn't a slam dunk case, that maybe there's a little bit of reasonable doubt. And there's nothing to stop him from getting on the stand and saying, look, I came down the basement stairs and I found my wife there dead. I don't know what the hell happened. And I panicked. He could make some crazy crap up, and that could just be something that he can just throw in there at the last minute. And the judge will allow it. The judge is probably going to allow that.
Doesn't the prosecution get that ahead of time? And does the judge hear that before? The judge makes a ruling on that, Mike, or no?
Well, if the defense says, look, Your Honor, before the trial begins, Your Honor, look, I'm not planning on calling my client, and the judge is great. But at some time during the trial, if the defense attorney feels that he needs to call his client because maybe he's losing badly, it's not looking good, the defense attorney thinks he's going to be convicted, he may go right to the prosecutor and say, look, and to the judge, Your Honor, at the end of the defendant's case, I'm going to call the defendant up on the stand, and he's going to rebut and say that that the fact pattern presented by the by the prosecutor is totally wrong. And if he does that within 48 hours, maybe of the last day of trial, I think a judge is going to allow it. I think he won't have to say exactly what he's going to say, what the defendant is going to say, but he's going to say, look, there's an alternate, thing here. Something happened. You guys missed evidence. I didn't know what to do. You can't prove that I actually killed her. All you can prove is I disposed of her body. Okay, I disposed of her body. That's a felony, but it's not murder.
Right.
It's
sort
not,
of a Hail Mary, Mike, right?
Yeah, it's that last second 1972, Raiders, Steelers game. Terry Bradshaw, throw the pass. That's all it is. It's a 1 in a million. But I think the judge in this case, all judges, they have to bend over backwards a little bit, especially with the defendant, because if they get a conviction, they know there's going to be appealable issues. So you don't want to hamstring the defense so much where you give them issues.
Give them an appeal.
Yeah, give them grounds for appeal.
Gotcha.
This is from Court TV.
Just doesn't seem to me to be a fair assessment of the evidence that was before the grand jury.
Right, bring back in our guest still with us to discuss, criminal defense attorney and former assistant prosecutor Franz Burkhardt. All right, Franz, here's where we are. The defense is essentially arguing that this first-degree murder charge shouldn't go forward. Of course, that requires some sort of premeditation. The way they're getting there is they're saying that he knew about this affair that Ana was having with this other guy, and they're kind of getting there with these inferences about what information he knew, what information he had heard about, what he had access to, but nothing concrete. So he's saying, look, that evidence wasn't in front of this grand jury. They should not have indicted on that charge. What do you make of his arguments?
So the viewers need to understand that in a death penalty case, you exhaust every single method of getting the death penalty off the table. And I think that this is a good example of a motion that, look, if they win the motion, death penalty's off the table. This is Florida. It'll be off the table. If they lose the motion, they've protected the record. But the bigger piece for me, Michael, is I'm listening. I don't have a dog in this hunt, but I'm listening and I'm thinking, well, if he knew about the affair and he acted because of the affair, that doesn't give him a free pass to murder. But doesn't that seem like a mitigator to putting him to death? I mean, in some places, again, premeditation is not the same thing as manslaughter, but in some places, the classic example of manslaughter is catching your partner doing something and in the heat of the moment, killing them because of that. So again, not a free pass to murder, but certainly is an interesting mitigator. And that's what keeps coming to me. And if I'm thinking that, does a potential juror think that? I don't know that they're going to have a chance at this motion, Michael, but it certainly is getting some of that argument out. And if I'm a prosecutor, I'm wondering that myself.
Well, it changes a little bit. I understand what you're saying, this heat of passion thing, as far as manslaughter and being mitigating. But what they're saying is that, let's say around December 22nd, he does a number of searches for the guy that they find out is her lover. And there's all these messages on Instagram. He admits to having access to iMessages and Instagram where the two of them were communicating. So from December 22nd all the way through January 1st, when they're claiming he killed her, He's thinking about this guy. He's stewing on this whole thing. He doesn't want her to leave. She tells him, I'm going to go to Washington with the kids because I'm working there almost full time at this point. And these are the things that lead him to say, you know what, I'm going to kill my wife and premeditate it. I'm not sure I see where you're going with the mitigating factor and the manslaughter aspect of it.
So, Mike, there's some other people with some other ideas here.
Yeah.
And the fact that this is a death penalty case also exacerbates all these legal rulings. And we are now September 2nd. This case is slated to go to trial October 20th. So how many more motions is the defense going to file before the start of this trial on October 20th, Mike?
As many as they possibly can. Let your imagination, be your guide. Just, they're going to, this is what you see, as much as I'm a cop and that's my angle on everything. I always have to think about what does the defense attorney want to do. They have that, zealously advocate for their client ethical obligation. We saw this with Dan Taylor and a lot of other people. You do everything in your power so nobody could ever say you didn't do your best. And therefore, if you lose the case, you lose the case, but at least you tried. There'll be a lot more motions. I like that defense attorney's spin on it. Well, if he knew about the murder, if Brian knew about Anna's possible affair for about a week, at least a week, he's stewing on it. That excuses him. That means that it's a long spread out heat of passion. Heat of passion isn't like what we would think like a split second decision. You saw your lover in bed with somebody else. No, he's saying it's stretched out over the course of a week, and that actually mitigates against that malice of forethought, because he was so confronted with this emotional reality, he couldn't deal with it. So therefore, it shouldn't be murder one. I love that sort of theory because it comes from a defense attorney who knows what he's talking about. But the thing is, will the jury buy that idea? I don't know. Possibly. You remember, he only has to get one juror on his side. But tremendous thought process and imagination by a defense attorney.
Absolutely. Jane C. from the chat. Crime of passion, but it was premeditated, which with his purchase of supplies and planning. Yeah. Great thought, Jane. Absolutely.
Don't we believe, though, that she was already dead when he purchased those supplies? She was probably killed on New Year's Eve going into New Year's Day, and then he purchased the items on New Year's Day.
Yeah, but he's still oh, you mean premeditation as to he had already killed her?
Well, listen, there's no doubt in my mind that he premeditated the whole thing. I don't think it was a crime of passion, and then he went out and bought the supplies. He knew what he was going to do. I really feel strongly about that. Yeah. But I think that to call buying the supplies premeditation, I think the way that the police have laid it out, and from what evidence we see, we think that she was killed overnight on New Year's Eve into New Year's Day, and then he goes out and buys the supplies to dispose of the body. I believe he had called the babysitter to watch the kids for a couple hours somewhere in there too. So, and they said that he was alone when the babysitter went into the house. So, I think that kind of negates the premeditation. But Billy, is he going to roll the dice? What Mike was just saying with regard to the death penalty phase of it. Or is there going to be a conversation at some point like that we believe took place in the Kohlberger case between the defense attorney and the defendant and say, listen, you're going to get convicted. You want to play Russian roulette with the death penalty, or is it maybe time to approach prosecution for a deal, So that may be playing out over the next couple of weeks. October 20th is when this trial is supposed to start. I think, with this latest defeat for defense, in denying of the dropping of the charges, perhaps those conversations will be taking place.
Yep, 100%. Folks, we have a new advertiser. FanDuel is a big sponsor of the Police Off the Cuff podcast on the Believe Network. And the NFL season, the National Football League season, starts this Thursday night with Philadelphia hosting the Dallas Cowboys. So FanDuel, you can go on FanDuel and get on their sports book, and you can go on FanDuel and place a live bet FanDuel, the new sponsor of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. Mike and Phil, we're at that point. Your final thoughts, Mike.
Bill, this is going to be a great case to watch and monitor because you've got a guy who he seems to have some sort of personality disorder, and he's capable of just about anything. And so, and I'm intrigued by what that defense attorney said. So I'm going to be watching this closely. So I hope everybody else does. It's not we think it's a slam dunk case, but you just never know when you get into that trial.
Absolutely. Phil, your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I think that I'm going to echo what Mike just said. This is going to be some case. If you're into a true crime type of podcast, or you want to pay attention or follow a trial, this is going to be the one. There's a ton of evidence here. I think that there may be some great arguments made about the evidence, but I really feel strongly that the prosecution has a strong case. And I always try to defer to the victims in this case. Just keep thoughts and prayers for Ana Walshe and for those poor 3 children that are left without a mother and maybe without a father as well. So just keep them in your thoughts and prayers.
Absolutely. Folks, I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. This is really, as they Phil and Mike just said, this is a really interesting case, and we'll keep following it as it moves forward. On behalf of myself, Bill Cannon, and the Police Off the Cuff audience, and Professor Mike Geary and Detective Phil Grimaldi, thank you for tuning in. Have a great night, everyone, and God bless.
Stay safe, everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.